Hello and welcome to Scale by Design. Today we're joined by Dan Hoffer. Dan, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're talking about a topic today that's dear to my heart, something that I'm constantly talking about. So I'm pumped to get into that. But before we jump into it, could you share with our audience your background and what you're up to?
Yeah. So I'm in Silicon Valley now. I'm one of three managing directors at AutoTech Ventures. Personally, I grew up in Boston and traveled around the world a bit. I have a background as an operator. I worked at some big companies and also started a travel website called Couchsurfing when I was younger. And so as a former entrepreneur myself, having raised money, I know what it's like to be in the shoes of a founder and to deal with the challenges and the joys of growing a fast growing startup. And then I came over to the dark side about 7 years ago, became VC. It was driven by my love of working with founders and helping advise them and sharing some of the lessons that I learned as founder and CEO of Couchsurfing. And it's just a lot of fun to work with growing companies. So right now I'm at AutoTech Ventures in Menlo Park, California, and we're a sector-focused fund with about 500 million under management across three funds. I'm one of three managing directors there, and we focus on all aspects of the ground transportation ecosystem, ranging from deep tech deals like autonomous driving and semiconductors and AI to business model innovations and marketplaces, fintech, and SaaS. I love marketplaces personally. I started a conference on marketplaces, creatively named the Marketplace Conference. And so I've invested in all over the world. My partners say that I'm the adventurous, crazy dude. I led our first investment in Africa into an Egyptian company, which subsequently went public on NASDAQ. But most of my investments are closer to home in the U.S. and in Europe as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I was looking at your website. It looks like you guys invested in Lyft.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, my partner Quinn was joined the advisory board of Lyft in 2007 when it was a pre-seed company. Lyft was actually created in his living room. So we have a long history of working with Lyft.
That's really cool. Really cool. Definitely a name that I think everyone's heard of at this point. So just wanted to reference that. And so to everybody out there, when Dan and I connected, I think earlier in the week or last week, we were thinking about different topics, things that could inform VC platform service strategy, as well as for founder CEOs and how they could think about scaling their orgs. We determined that discussing hiring strategy would be one of the most impactful things that VCs and tech executives, SaaS executives alike can look at and take away from this conversation to have significant value and actionable insights that they can implement. So I think I would love to just start at maybe a high level, and we could go through, Dan, if you want to start with like your high level strategy, or maybe you want to start with the top mistakes you see companies make. How do you want to start this off?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to note that, it's interesting as a VC because VCs come in different shapes and sizes and flavors and have different styles and so on. And, if you have a background in investment banking, your world is spreadsheets and you're really good at it. And all the financial modeling and the scenario analysis and sensitivity and all the strategic thinking, and that's great. But it gives you zero perspective on how to counsel founder CEO and how to grow their company from a talent and staffing perspective. All you can say is, well, either you hit your target revenue or margin number, or you didn't.
Yeah.
And then VCs just kind of yell at the CEO if they didn't make their numbers, which frankly most of them don't most of the time. So the nuance of actually growing a startup and knowing how to think about talent and organizational planning is important and something that really helps to be working with operators around the table.
I really just don't think it's possible unless it's like a experienced VC that has just really gotten into the weeds with several portfolio companies. Maybe they can pull it off because they've been heavily enough involved in the hiring cycle. But quite honestly, if you haven't been in the trenches and actually scaled a company, at a minimum, a VC firm needs to hire a head of talent that has. You got to find somebody that's been, if you're in the tech sector, you need to find a head of talent that is in startup growth stage tech and ideally has worked for one, if not several hyper growth companies, VC backed hyper growth companies, and work with somebody that's actually built talent strategy, not somebody who's just like a director that basically does hands-on recruiting, but somebody who's actually built scalable talent acquisition solutions and is thinking in terms of, scalable channels of hire and thinking about efficiency and what's going to work and what's not. You really need that in order to guide strategy for your portfolio companies. Yeah, like opposed to what you're saying, if you're just coming from a background on spreadsheets and doing analysis, that's obviously incredibly valuable. But from a talent strategy perspective, you need somebody who has that, I think, hands-on experience, right?
Mm-hmm. And people are so messy, and the kinds of things you deal with as a manager of people, it's like it's really impossible to predict. You deal with all sorts of crazy scenarios and people crying politics and jockeying and all kinds of things that tend to push you, or at least in my experience, they do.
Yeah, no, it's a total shit show if you don't mind me cursing. But yeah, it's a total mess. And I think just to jump into it, I don't know. For me, it's easiest to think about it in terms of mistakes. So, my company has partnered with over 150 hypergrowth VC backed tech SaaS companies over the past 7 years to help them recruit. So we've noticed a couple of things, and there's a few huge mistakes that we see across the board. One is if a company is founded by founder CEOs or co-founders that come from big tech, right? Like let's say that they come from a Netflix and now they're coming into the startup world to recruit talent to scale their teams. One of the biggest mistakes we see those early stage founders make is thinking that recruiting for their seed or series A company is going to be similar to what it was like to recruit engineers at Netflix. And it seems like, I don't know, when I say that out loud, it seems obvious that it isn't the same. But again, we see a lot of founder CEOs that are not serial entrepreneurs or haven't been in a startup before, and at least an executive position where they're hiring, make that mistake, and they don't understand it's going to be a lot messier. The ability to attract talent, the burden of proof, the burden of I suppose proving stability or roadmap or whatever else is on the company. You don't have a brand standing behind you. Is that an issue that you've encountered with early stage companies? Just kind of like you have to do this level setting or expectation setting on really what's going to have to go into hiring?
Yeah, I think level setting. There's a lot that goes into the concept of level setting.
Right.
So let's step back a bit. You asked for one of the mistakes that I see, and one of the mistakes that I see most commonly is around titling, and so I find that first time founders are often very eager to give away C-level titles. And so what happens is, if you're a 5-10 person seed stage company, you want to recruit someone shiny from Google, let's say, and so you find an engineer and you make him chief technology officer. And the fact is, chief technology officer is a very different sort of role as an individual contributor engineer. And the other problem is, as your company scales, then you now have a CTO in place. And so imagine if you wanted to hire that person's manager from Google. Instead of the engineer, you want to hire the engineering manager, but now you've given away your CTO title, and so you can't hire above it. And so you're forced to either fire your CTO, which of course you don't want to do, demote your CTO, which you can do, but is going to risk demotivating that person, and then also depending on the company culture, kind of may send a signal to other folks inside the team. So basically you kind of back yourself into a corner early on, from an org chart and titling perspective, and that's one of the most common mistakes that I see people make.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've made that mistake. like just to own it, like starting my own company.
It's very
Uh,
common. Yeah.
yeah, I know. It's funny. It's like, we're a talent company as well. But I think the issue, the trap that founders fall into when it comes to that too, is it's like they see it as a hack. Like it's okay, we're having a really hard time recruiting talent.
Right.
How, as a seed company with like less than 500K ARR, how are we going to attract like really great people, right? Maybe if we had the backing of a very well-known VC, that's going to help. They can refer somebody to us, but it's typically, even in that scenario, it can be very difficult to get somebody to leave a more established company with product market fit,
Totally.
even if it is a startup exec. So I think it's just, they see it as like, okay, this person's in a manager role. Let's give them
Yeah.
a VP title. And
Yeah.
that kind of stuff happens because they're having trouble. But it's,
Yeah.
again, it as you said, it really can screw up the future. And quite honestly, the skill set's different, as you mentioned. Like, if you need a VP that's guiding strategy and is going to be building out the framework to achieve the next level of scale, like somebody in a manager role doesn't know how to do that. Like there is still essentially following marching orders, or, as you mentioned, like an engineer. Like they're not necessarily the people guiding strategy and building out the playbooks and the process to make it repeatable and scalable. And it's just totally a different skill set, right?
Right. Right. And if you step back a bit, just philosophically, there are multiple ways you can pay people. And you can pay people in cash, you can pay people in stock, or upside, or whatever form it is. You can pay people in title. That's where this comes into play. You can pay people in quality of life, or perks like working remote, free lunches at the office, annual offsites to the Bahamas, whatever it is, right? So compensation can take many forms, and when you're a seed stage startup, you don't have that many levers to pull. One other is reputation of the company. That's another form of payment. And so when you're a seed stage company, nobody's ever heard of you. You can't pay in terms of pedigree of the company. It's not like, working for this company will automatically open doors later in your career in the same way that working at Goldman Sachs would, or McKinsey, or whatever. And you can't pay a lot of cash because you don't have a lot of cash. Potentially you can pay in equity and upside. You don't really want to work. You don't want to pay in work-life balance because you want them to be busting their ass. Probably not a lot of perks either. And so ultimately what it comes down to is you can pay in stock and you can pay in title. And so that's why people tend to pay in title so much. And it's totally understandable. I mean, it makes sense. You're doing the best with you can with what you got. But it does create some risks down the road.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like maybe that's one of the contributing factors to hypergrowth companies. I suppose letting go of leadership every couple of years if they are scaling in hypergrowth. I mean, obviously, one of the primary reasons for somebody maybe parting ways with a VP of sales, for instance, is if that VP specializes in a certain phase of growth, and then they're looking for somebody that's later stage,
Right.
which I can certainly understand that philosophy. Obviously there's exceptions, right? With people that can scale if they're, I guess, smart enough to adapt, proactive enough to seek advisors, and to prove out that they can handle the next phase of growth. But I think that's one reason, and I think too, it's you're constantly trying to level up the skill set on your team, and it's how do you attract that talent. I do think that sometimes founders, particularly from a technical background, maybe that aren't used to selling, have trouble articulating the vision and the future that they believe in. And I think that the better founder CEOs are at articulating, hey, this is the future we believe in. This is why us as a founding team are well positioned to thrive in this future.
Mm-hmm.
And here is the path forward to make that happen. I think the better that mission can be articulated, the more likely they are going to be able to, bring on those executives, right?
Yeah. I mean, and if you're the next Steve Jobs and you have a reality distortion field that just makes everybody want to join you, then that's fantastic. Of course, there's only one Steve Jobs. So, but that's definitely the kind of salesmanship one has to adopt in these situations.
Yeah, for sure. And I, just to keep it moving here on other, big mistakes that I see, and this is at a slightly further stage of scale, right? So, like, let's say you've built that initial kind of executive team, and now those executives are hiring for their own teams.
Mhm,
I think one critical thing that is often missed by founding teams is they don't. One of the things they're not evaluating when they're hiring executives or even directors or managers is they're not looking at those people's experience hiring,
mhm,
right? Like when you hire like a VP or a director or manager at an early stage, you need to make sure that they have experience actually building the team from the ground up.
mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Uh, I mean, it's not about just like guiding strategy, playbooks, repeatability, scalability, in some cases, unit economics, all of which are incredibly important. But what's really interesting is when a lot of people talk about professional development and progression into leadership roles, often talent isn't even really mentioned.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's just like the technical skill set of whatever the function is, but not getting deep into, hey, how are we going to attract and hire the best individuals for the team? So, what I always say is like you could have the best recruiter in the world, whether agency side or in house, but if you have, a hiring team that doesn't know anything about how to hire top talent, you're going to get crappy results. Like it's just that's just how it is. So that's a huge problem I see with startups and growth stage. They haven't hired leaders that actually know how to hire.
Mhm. Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, this is the challenge because when you hire a senior executive from a big company, then they know how to hire, but they may struggle operating in the small, 5-10 person team environment.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and so so how do you bridge this gap in practice? What's the actionable feedback for founders dealing with some of these dynamics? In my opinion, there are two pieces that I think are most valuable. First of all, I like head of roles, because head of roles enable you to potentially hire above people, gives you a little more wiggle room around the final title. And then also, I encourage people to be upfront with prospective hires that titles, and the org chart generally may be fluid and may evolve in somewhat unpredictable ways, because I think people get upset at bait and switch dynamics. They get hired into one role and then get told that the rug's being pulled out from under them in some fundamental way, and it fundamentally changes their calculus, and that leads to resentment and demotivation. But if you start from the beginning, building a culture of this is we're all on this rocket ship together. The ride's going to be bumpy along the way, but here's what you can expect, and just be upfront and say, look, we're going to change. The company's going to change. One thing that will not change is your stock options.
Mm.
So you are firmly aligned with the long-term success of the business, and you may even get a salary boost along the way as we get more financing and as you get more experience. But other things can change, and so if you set those expectations up front and kind of build a culture around that, and have some head of roles, I think the whole thing can be navigated a little bit more easily.
Yeah, I think so. I think what I mean, and a lot of people I don't think do this, right? And I think part of it is that you're just running so fast you don't even stop to think. But you're right. Like just having that conversation up front is so critically important. And I think too, it's setting the expectation. It's also hopefully hiring folks that they are focused on the overall. They understand it's a team sport, and they also are people that are eager to learn. So if you have a head of, I agree with the head of philosophy, by the way. That's one thing that I've recommended in the past too. Um, I think it's hiring people that understand, like, look, it's a team sport. We want to scale the company. At the end of the day, I want my equity to be worth as much as it can be worth. And if that means bringing in somebody with the right skill set to scale us to the next level,
Mhm.
great.
Right.
You want to sell, I think, that to people too. It's like, look, like you want your equity to be worth as much as possible. And two, in the long run for your career, bringing in that true C-level or that experienced VP is going to be a resource for you to learn from,
Right.
so you don't hit a wall in your career. And I think,
Yeah, and
again, you have to have
if you
those
do it
conversations up front too.
right, they will learn from that person, and
Yeah.
they will even be on board with reporting to that person, because they'll be like, great, this is they'll see that potential
Yeah.
for it.
The other thing that's it's kind of messed up about giving people too senior of titles is that, like, if you give somebody a VP title that they're not ready for,
Mhm.
and then they ultimately don't succeed, and you have to let them go due to performance, and then they're looking for another job and they're not qualified for any fucking VP jobs.
Right.
You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like it's like people are eager to take titles even if they're not ready for them.
Yep. Definitely.
So I think that's on the candidate side too. Like if you're listening in and you're a manager level, like don't necessarily just jump at the chance of being a VP if you're not ready and you haven't developed the skill set, because it could give you that temporary lift, but then you have a high. I mean, even if you have the right experience, VP turnover is incredibly high in the startup world. A lot, I know a lot of incredible VPs of revenue, sales, marketing, whatever it might be, that have like several stints on their resume of like 9 months. You
Yeah.
know, so if you don't have the experience, it's not likely that it's going to go very well at the startup stage.
One of the questions that VCs ask sometimes, at least in internal conversations, and this applies to CEOs, but this could also apply really to anybody. Um, do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? And and frankly, there's really only one right answer here, which is to be rich, because that aligns everybody's interests the best. If you're trying to be the boss, for at least from in terms of the org chart or the title, then that's often misaligned with the company's interests over time.
I agree, and we see this mistake play out in so many different ways, not only on an individual level, but on a department basis, whether it's hiring or anything else. It takes different functions working together, right? Like, it's at the end of the day, like a VP of talent acquisition isn't able to influence, maybe is able to influence, but can't control what a VP of engineering is doing.
Mhm.
And that's, one of the other pieces of advice I give to founders and CEOs as they start to scale and start to hit that Series B phase is that um, hiring outcomes have to be baked into performance criteria for function heads. So like for a VP of engineering, part of how their performance is measured has to be on their ability to hit hiring plans.
Mhm. Yep.
And that has to be a team sport, because if that's all falling on talent acquisition could be, let's say, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, which they're a lot of times they're not doing the things the right way, but let's say that they are. They're not able to control if a VP of engineering is missing interviews every week or isn't willing to be realistic about salary ranges or, org development or role responsibilities. These types of things have to be segmented out. Responsibility has to be segmented out company wide in order to actually achieve hiring plans.
Yep.
Huge problem I see out there.
Yep. Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah. And I think too, like just getting to the talent side, I see one of the biggest problems I see in growth stage is companies hiring heads of talent acquisition that come from an HR background.
Yes.
And
Very
because
different skill set.
yeah, it's like it's not a performance based culture. And I like, for me, like the best talent acquisition orgs are run like revenue orgs.
Yep.
And so you get people that come from this HR environment and there's just no performance metrics. There's no emphasis on data. They don't understand technology stacks. They don't understand how to build data and reporting to get insights that actually drive talent strategy. They're just not technical. And that's like, I actually believe that a lot of the best talent acquisition leaders come from an agency. Like they need to have in-house experience, but they need to have been in that role for at least a few years where it's metric driven, it's quota driven, because that's how you're going to learn not only the hustle, but the data kind of mindset toward optimizing a funnel.
Yep. Definitely. It's a very different skill set.
Yeah. I mean, how do you like, so when you're advising portfolio companies, like, do you guys get into um like reporting and how they can think about optimizing talent acquisition, or is it more just like, high level, like, hey, this is kind of the skill set you should be looking for at this stage? I mean, what other kind of advice are you given?
Yeah, we're an early stage VC, so
Mhm.
typically the companies that we're working with do not have very robust or large talent acquisition departments or even HR departments internally. A lot of them have outsourced HR, and maybe they have one HR person or one in-house recruiter, but a lot of them typically work with external recruiters, and so we will make intros to recruiters that we believe would be a good fit for them. But for the most part, they're not doing very much in house.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're still just trying to, figure things out. Obviously, there's for as long as possible, it's good to keep that overhead down, and you don't necessarily want fixed costs and talent acquisition, which is you need like more, I guess, on-demand solutions, right? That you can scale up or down.
Yeah, and to your point, the HR function is very different from the recruiting function, and the HR function is there are a lot of fractional HR platforms and service providers out there. In
Yeah,
fact, many of them are bundled with fractional CFO and accounting and controller resources. So we see a lot of companies work with that kind of ecosystem of offerings, and then recruiting is a separate category.
for sure. Do you for the HR side, do you have any like platforms that you recommend, or are you like off the top of your head, do you have any that you typically go to?
A lot of our companies use TriNet.
Okay.
We have there are other CFO companies that offer it, like out here in the Bay Area. There's Birkland, there's Cruise, there's France. I believe all those offer some HR support in addition to finance support.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so my company, Secure Vision, we use JustWorks,
Yep.
which is a PEO similar to TriNet. I think ours is like, I'm trying to remember why we picked JustWorks. I think we felt like it was a little bit more flexible and SMB focused
Yeah.
for us at least. But like the main driver behind us doing that was compliance and running payroll in so many different states.
Sure.
Like we have employees in like 15 different states, and it like we couldn't keep up with everything. Like there's no way for us to understand compliance.
And taxes.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was just, and then different requirements, like everything from like PTO, and I mean, it's just different. So we just decided like enough, like we need to be focused on growth, delivery, consistency, figuring out how to scale in a responsible way that's focused on unit economics and process and whatnot, and making sure we get that right. Like we can't focus on these personnel issues. We need, the only personnel issues we want to focus on is on acquisition and retention.
Yep. Yeah.
And besides that, like it shouldn't be something we're thinking about right now. It's the way we looked at it.
Yep. Yep. And every now and then you get the corner case of harassment or bullying or something like that, and you need those are legal issues. So you need to make sure that that's being handled properly, or else you're at the risk of a lawsuit if it's not.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to have the on-call resource, but you don't need someone full-time for that.
Oh, for sure. And like, I mean, honestly, I've been in business for 7 years. We basically changed our business model 2 years ago. So we used to be a contingent firm, which is like fee-based recruiting, and we moved to an embedded recruiting model, which I feel is like superior and much better for a lot of reasons. But anyways, like 2 years ago, we started, scaling. And since then, like obviously, like more personnel issues arise, and we did have a situation in which it was like a potential lawsuit. We didn't have a PEO in place. We probably did not have all the right things in terms of like making sure that if we let somebody go due to performance, we're totally have our asses covered, right? And so what ended up happening is, as founder CEO, I get pulled into all this crap, dealing with that for like a month, working with a bunch of attorneys, and all my focus goes there opposed to going on growth.
Totally.
And so like that's the other risk. Like obviously a lawsuit can be
and then
devastating.
you have to justify to your board why you didn't achieve your milestones for that.
Exactly. It just screws you because it takes away your focus from growth, and then you have to deal with this stuff. And so it's like the two things I learned from that experience is one, get the PEO, make sure you're compliant, put the right kind of performance improvement plans in place, the right written kind of correspondence throughout a period of over, at least a month or two at least, and give people reasonable times, then making sure that the separation agreements are exactly what they need to be. And then also what I learned is, as early as possible as a CEO, try to get somebody in to operate the business. So somebody who can manage the day-to-day so that you can focus on growth and solving new problems. Like, I don't think that like founder CEOs should be like doing the consistent nuts and bolts of business operations. You want that COO type or the co-founder or whoever else, like somebody's running the day-to-day and somebody's focused on growth, expansion strategy, talking with customers. that type of thing. And that was another lesson learned, because if you don't have that person operating the business, then you get, dragged down into all the personnel stuff that isn't going to actually help the company grow. Right.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I actually remember, like, do you know the company Sendoso?
No.
Okay. It's a SaaS company. They do like gifting, right? So like if you, like, it part of your sales funnel, if you want to send, I don't know,
Yeah.
like
I,
whatever, right?
I focus on ground transportation, so a little out of
Right.
touch with gifting.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, like, I think Chris, founder CEO, like scaled to like 800 people. They're insanely successful.
Nice.
And I think one of the things he said is, like, within his first 10 employees, he hired somebody to operate the business so he could focus on growth.
Mhm.
Two of the most successful services companies that are like recurring revenue services, similar to my own, I guess, like different industries, but similar business model in a sense. Like, they both hired operators within their first 10 employees. Like, so some of the most successful hyper growth companies that I know have taken that path.
Yeah. I mean,
And
if
then
you can find people like that, that's great.
yeah, right. Like, that's, well, right. That's it all comes back to, like, how do you actually find and attract those people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now that I'm thinking about it, all of those leaders were pretty damn good at sales.
Mhm. Yeah.
Very persuasive, very charismatic, likable
It,
people.
it, it helps. It's funny because I think studies have been done for publicly traded companies that charisma and salesmanship for a public company CEO is not necessarily correlated with stock price performance. But I think at the early stage, when you're a startup and you're just getting off the ground, it does help. At
I
least
think so.
anecdotally, that's been my experience.
I think so, because it's like I think, yeah, I think the engineering leaders typically do have a harder time recruiting and getting that initial leadership team in place, and particularly like revenue leaders,
Well, I
because they're
think,
not
yeah.
they're not speaking the same language.
Yeah, I think engineering leaders can be great at recruiting engineers,
Right.
and business leaders can be great at recruiting business people. So really the question is, can you achieve that crossover dynamic and attract a different profile than yourself? That's where the magic happens. That's where the real strength is.
Yeah, maybe we could get into that a little bit deeper. So, like, if you are working with a founder or co-founders that come from an engineering background, what advice do you have for them on how to hire a VP, their first VP of sales or marketing? Like, how do you help them kind of figure out who's going to be the right candidate?
Yeah. Well, as an investor, I'm always happy to help interview candidates. And typically I have a board seat. And so a good senior business leader will often want to speak with investors or board members. But even if they don't, a technical CEO should feel comfortable asking their investors for help interviewing or closing candidates, whether business candidates or otherwise. It's a reasonable request and something that I'm always happy to do. So I would encourage, if you do have VC backing or even non-VC investor backing, and maybe an advisor or a board member, someone you can lean on to help. You can discuss with them some of the hiring strategy for those business roles, potentially pull them into the interviews, and maybe not the first interview, but subsequent interviews, or you don't have to be present. You can have them talk offline without you. But ultimately, everybody is aligned. Your investors are aligned with you in believing in the future of the business, or else they wouldn't have invested.
Mhm.
So they should be good salespeople on your behalf, and then you can work with them to chart out the best profile for
For
this hire.
sure. So for sure. So, like, when you're interviewing these sales leaders, like, how do you, like, what's your interview strategy? Like, and I'm sure it depends to some extent, like, how the portfolio company has already run the interview. So you kind of maybe fill in the gaps, but are there specific things that you look for to evaluate, if a revenue leader is going to actually be the real deal, or they're just really good at selling themselves?
Yeah. Well, look, as a VC, I invest in fewer than 1% of the companies that come across my desk. And so if I'm investing in a company, that means that I really believe in them. Like, I turned down 99 companies, actually more than 99. It's actually more than 99%. I turned down over 99 companies just to invest in you. And if that's the case, then I'm more than happy to go to bat for you, try to get other people as excited as I am about the future of the company and the potential of the company. So often it's kind of a sales job on my side. And the goal is not just to sell, but more to share what got me excited about the opportunity. And if I can explain to them what got me excited, then they'll probably get excited too. So that's how I think about it.
Got
Explaining
it.
the potential and the vision, both the CEO's vision and my own vision as an investor. And so that's an important part of the process.
I love it. And that's kind of full circle, right? Because like we were like at the beginning of the conversation talking about how the ability to articulate the vision
Mhm.
is so incredibly important to recruiting a leadership team. So I think that's probably maybe a core takeaway. Just really, and again, the way that I look at it is like, okay, what is the future of the industry? Like, what is the future that the company believes in, right? Really being able to articulate that point. This is what's going to happen over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years in our industry. Here is the data to back that up. This is, our background and why, what we believe in terms of providing a solution for that future. This is why this team, this leadership team, the founders, and potentially the investors backing us are well positioned to thrive in that future.
Mhm.
This is why we're going to win, right?
Yep.
And I think it's really, it sounds simple in a sense because it's not like we're not pouring through spreadsheets or we're not building out a robust process or tech stack in order to make this happen. But I think maybe because it's not as technical, sometimes people don't understand how really important it is.
Mhm.
But I think it's, again, for that initial leadership team, they really have to believe in the future. And, those stock options ultimately, they're not going to, it's not worth anything if they don't believe that the company is actually going to scale and achieve a massive amount of success. And if the reality is like, it's like self-fulfilling to some extent, not always, but like if you can get the best team in place, your product is going to be more likely to be successful. I mean, to some extent, priority, Jesus, I'm blanking on the word. If you have tech, that's
Right there.
actually, yeah, there you go. Thank you. Just blanking over here. Doing too many podcasts these days. But anyway, if you have that type of tech, then obviously that's going to, help you be successful and corner a market in some cases. But again, like the quality of your executive team is going to, help you ensure that you can actually like deliver on the idea, the product that you're building. So
Yeah, well, I think you also need people in the company who all collectively believe in the potential and the future of the company.
yeah,
Um, and so in any company you need to manage morale and motivation and belief in the future.
yeah,
In startups especially so because it's so bumpy. It's a for the CEO especially, every day can be a roller coaster. Huge successes and huge failures all within hours of each other.
yeah,
And so part of their job is to shield the rest of the company from that degree of volatility, because a lot of people can't stomach it.
yep,
But even so, they're going to feel it anyway. And so you need to, being a CEO is a lonely job, because you're always the source of strength to others. But you do need to convey that sense of confidence and optimism, to the best of your ability, no matter what.
yeah, for sure. And I honestly, I think that's another great point of why you need somebody operating the business. If you could have that person, doing the day to day so that, when you're dealing with all this crazy shit about trying to close your next big client, or you just churn a client, or there's a big performance concern, or something's going on in your product roadmap or release dates and things are getting all over the place. Like somebody else is just kind of managing the culture, thinking about, professional development and career mapping and retention and this type of stuff. Because you're right, like it could be incredible. There could be a lot of volatility, and you need to have the headspace to deal with that, and you don't want it to impact all the people around you. Hopefully, the only one who has to hear it is the COO or whoever's operating the co-founder. Uh, I think one thing I have noticed too, just about like incredibly successful companies, is that there is definitely a culture of like drinking the Kool-Aid. Like I see that all the time. And it does seem that a lot of the time, like it's kind of over the top, and it seems at least a little bit like BS a lot of the times. Like like we're changing the world or like this and that. It's like, yeah, it's a scheduling app. Like, okay,
Mm,
like, what are we talking about here? But at the same time, I think it's important. Like if you can create that type of energy around what you're building, it's definitely very important. People do better work when they're inspired and they're excited to go to work.
totally, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's like, for the early days of Salesforce.com, you can think about getting excited about working for a new lightweight CRM tool, or eliminating all of software. It's like one vision is much more, frankly, grandiose and but also inspiring than the other.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, hey, look, this has been a really insightful conversation. I've enjoyed chatting with you, talking shop, and I think there's a lot of takeaways that people can take from this and help to guide their talent strategies, how they advise their portfolio, and hopefully for startup executives as well, in terms of how they think about hiring their executive team, scaling their producing a scalable talent strategy. So I just wanted to say, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Well, these are fun topics and also important ones. So thanks for giving me a chance to chat about it. And yeah, best of luck to all the founders out there who are working their butts off to build the next amazing thing.
Yeah, let's do it. It sounds good. And Dan, if people want to connect with you or AutoTech Ventures, what's the best way to engage with you guys?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Hoffer. Also, the website for AutoTech Ventures is autotechvc.com.
Okay, good stuff. Well, thank you, Dan, and for everybody else tuning in, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Take care.